Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Joy. Welcome. Thanks for hi. Thank you for coming tonight to our fourth of our five-part series on understanding and responding to our homeless neighbors. This is a series that All Angels and New York City Relief has collaborated on. Originally, we thought we were just going to be training a couple of our staff. And for those of you who have been around for most of these sessions, we've had up to 80 people in some sessions, and we're just really encouraged that a lot of you have come to so many of these, even though they're very big and heavy topics, to really understand the different aspects of what people endure when they're living in shelters or on the streets or in transition between housing. And for many of you, you're volunteers or staff people who work directly with this population. Some of you are very new to the conversation, so we have a lot of different people in the room. Some of you have experienced firsthand some of the things that we're going to talk about. Some of you are professionals in some of these topics of conversation. And so we encourage a lot of participation, especially tonight because it's a smaller group and because the way that we've set it up is very focused on group participation and conversation tonight. So we hope that we can engage you a bit because it's such a wide topic so that we can get different perspectives and different expertise into this evening. If you did not receive a packet already, they're at the check-in desk, so make sure you have one of those. I think Josiah will go through it more with you. A couple of housekeeping things. We have food and drinks at any point tonight. You can help yourself so that you're not hungry throughout. The restrooms, just to minimize some of the sound in the room, we're going to ask you to use the restrooms downstairs. This one up here is really loud and we're recording this. And we will have a break at one point just to let your minds rest and let your legs stretch. So that'll be about halfway through. I think that's all I have to say, so let's welcome up Josiah Haken.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So as some of you know, my name is Josiah, for those of you who don't know. This is part 4 of the workshop series that we're doing. And for those of you who have really persevered through, I just candidly will admit to you that I am, as I was preparing for this one, I'm like, man, this is just such a lot of material. And I have sort of cut my teeth on this topic by doing outreach with New York City Relief for the last 8.5 years. A lot of you know that already. But so the first topic, the first week, for those of you who were here, there's noise happening all around me. The first week was on creating a culture of dignity, and we talked about how our environment where we serve and where we engage with people who are experiencing homelessness and people who are struggling with acute financial and emotional distress and issues that raise the level of their stress and raise the level of their just the struggle. I mean, again, when you're struggling to survive, the environment you create when you serve that group of people has to be conducive to a dignifying experience. And the environment that we create will make or break the experience for the guests that we serve. So the first one that was the session 1. Session 2, we talked about the housing struggle, the idea of getting affordable housing in New York City and how ridiculous and difficult that process can be. And we talked about the shelter system, and we talked about outreaches, and we just went into kind of a deeper dive into the question of why people are struggling in the street, and why because you have the stereotypical answer, well, why don't they go to shelter? Why don't people go into shelter? And we talked about how complex that reality is and why there are very good reasons, there are very legitimate and very good reasons why someone would choose to sleep outside as opposed to going into a shelter based on their experiences, based on reputation, based on how things are going, where they are in their lives. So we talked about that in part 2. In part 3, we talked about drugs, alcohol, and addiction services, because we understand that the one thing I remember the point that I made, was really important to me to make, was that it's a stereotype to associate addiction with homelessness, that not all people who are experiencing homelessness are addicted. That's a false stereotype. That is a stigma. It is not accurate. And while that is the the case, there is a higher level of addiction among folks who are experiencing homelessness than the general population. And we talked about what that means and kind of why that might be and what services and resources are available for folks who are experiencing that. And then tonight, we are going to take on the very small and very, just sort of sidebar issue of physical and mental health and how that, I was being sarcastic, obviously. We understand that this is a massive, massive topic when it comes to homelessness and when it comes to people who are experiencing homelessness. But here's what I want to do out of the gate. This may be redundant for some of you who have heard me speak before. You know this is the case, but I'm going to say it again anyway, that I am not a mental health professional, okay? I am not a medical care provider. So I am not approaching the topic of physical and mental health from the standpoint of a medical professional. I'm approaching this topic from the standpoint of someone who has done outreach in the streets for many years, and someone who has engaged with people who are experiencing severe mental health struggles or severe physical health struggles, and then trying to navigate the systems that are available to those individuals and triage the situation with those individuals as an advocate, as a, that's the best word I can think of, honestly, in terms of my role and the role of the organization I work with in terms of providing advocacy and peer-to-peer assistance and encouragement and friendship for people who are experiencing these issues. But I want to be very clear about that, because I think it's really important that if you are expecting me to come at this topic from the standpoint of a medical health professional, you might be severely disappointed. You also might be surprised to learn that there are lots of things I do not know, and I reserve the right to be wrong. And I believe that there are people in this room who know more about this topic than I do specifically. And so that's one of the reasons we also want to just have a conversation with you guys and encourage kind of dialogue around this topic. So as we go about talking about this, I just want to make it very clear, like that's kind of the direction I'm approaching this issue from. So as we look at it from that lens. So if you're a volunteer at a church, right? We're in All Angels, we have service, like if you're volunteering at a church where lots of people who are experiencing homelessness are coming in, you're going to be encountering and engaging people who are dealing with severe health issues and a ranging of health issues. You're also, if you're a staff person at an organization that serves people who are experiencing homelessness, you are going to be facing this stuff head on as well. If you work at a hospital, or if you work anywhere, and if you're just walking down the street, if you see someone in the street who's having a hard time, maybe they're behaving oddly, they're behaving strangely, they're talking to themselves, they're sitting on the sidewalk and they are in a acute crisis situation. And the question becomes, what do you do in that situation? How do you approach this topic as a volunteer, as a passerby, or in my case, and I'm guessing a lot of people's cases in this room, as a person of faith? How do you follow the ways of Jesus, who's talked about the Good Samaritan, and how do you help someone on the side of the road who's beat up, who's bleeding, who's hurting? How do you engage that person with compassion and with dignity? And so that's sort of my context and my lens that I want to talk about a bit tonight. And I want to start off, I should tell you that I am a little under the weather. Last night, it was about 5 o'clock. I was at home, and I just started feeling that sore throat. So if I do shake your hand, I apologize. There's hand sanitizer somewhere around here. If I don't shake your hand, it's because I remembered that I'm not feeling well, and I honored you by not shaking your hand. But the point is, I was starting to get that sore throat. You know, the feeling. This weather this year has been terrible, and in the sense of apparently it hasn't gotten cold enough for a long enough period of time. This is what I'm told. Again, not a health professional, but I'm told that it hasn't gotten cold enough for a long enough period of time to kill all the germs. Some of you who know more about this stuff than I do can tell me. So there's a lot of sickness. Like, we've had people on our team and our organization who've just gotten crushed with the flu. Just gotten crushed with this illness. And so last night I'm at home and all of a sudden I start getting this sore throat. And I'm like, man, this is really inconvenient because I have to do this thing, the workshop tomorrow. I'm doing a training on Saturday. I'm speaking on Sunday. I'm also a fool. Monday I have a workshop, yes. So like there's this back-to-back-to-back thing, so I'm like, man, I gotta save my voice and I gotta figure out how to do this. So I went to bed early, right? That's what you do. I went to bed early. I was curled up in my blanket, you know, really cozy. I took some Advil, you know, nighttime medicines. I was boom, out, right? Out cold. I woke up at the usual time to take my kids to school this morning. I went downstairs, got them breakfast, and then my wife and I took them to school, which was great. And I came home and I was like, man, I'm still feeling kind of junky. So I went back to bed and laid down for a little bit and took some medicine. And then I realized that, man, I am the most privileged person on the face of the earth, because I had I have a sniffle. I have like a cold, right? I have like a sore throat, and yet I was able for the last like 24 hours to just chill. I had a bed to sleep in. I had like a cozy blanket to curl up underneath. I had like access to medicine. I just had to go to the cabinet and open it up and pull out some medicine. I just was able to take some time because of my job to like be flexible with my time. And I just thought to myself, like, this epitomizes my privilege as a person who is not experiencing homelessness. And I wanted to frame our conversation this evening about health by just saying, like, the little things. It's the little things that I think become some of the most destructive and difficult things to overcome when you don't have access and you don't have the bandwidth to go and get the help you need, or get the medicine you need, or get the treatment you need, or you're surviving from place to place, or you have an appointment that you go to, or you're making $8 an hour or $10 an hour, and your boss doesn't care. If if you get sick, he just replaces you, get someone else who's to make that much. So like, as we think about health, and as we think about like experiencing the realities of living day to day, I just really want us to remember, like, whatever position we are in, whether we are experiencing homelessness and we are in crisis, or we're in, like, on the opposite end of the spectrum, like myself, we're just so privileged and so just like lucky. Like, we need to be able to identify and empathize with the people that we are serving. And we need to be able, and I think that's the one thing I want to start off with, is just talking about with regards to physical and mental health. The key in the word is the same word that I talked about in the beginning, which is empathy. All right, we need to develop a level of empathy for the people that we are serving and engaging, and people who we see in the street, so that we can minimize the judgment that we have of those folks, and we don't want to like condescend to them. So some of you know Brené Brown, right? So if you guys heard of Brené Brown, I'm reading a book by Brené Brown called Dare to Lead, and I just fully endorse that book. It's a great book. Brené Brown talks a lot about empathy, and one of the things that she talks about is this idea that, let me see if I can find it here. I'm always looking for okay. So she talks about a couple steps to empathy. So as we talk, I'm going to get into some physical and mental health stuff in a minute. But as we talk about this from a volunteer standpoint, she talks about like perspective taking or putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right? That's like the first step. Perspective taking and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. This is something that I think, whether you've been homeless or not, it's easy to empathize with someone who is sick, right? Someone who is, like, we all, like, unless you are just, like, I don't know if you guys watch The Office, Dwight Schrute claims to have the best immune system. He's like, I don't get sick. There's like that one really great episode where he's like trying to develop a healthcare. Anybody else in Office? No, just me? Okay. So, thank you. At least there's one. Thank you. So two, amen. Praise the Lord. I'm not alone. But the point is like, unless you're Dwight Schrute, you do get sick, okay? You do experience illness. That there's no way around it. So this winter, like maybe you got the flu, maybe you are dealing with something, and I just want you to recall that. Recall what it felt like when you just got hit by a truck and getting out of bed in the morning was a struggle. And I think, remember that when the people that we see in the street, or the people that we serve, just surviving in, like, getting better from just any illness is just a struggle. when you don't have the luxury of a bed to sleep in, the time to get better, the medicine to access. And I think that we can recall that, and we can all empathize with what it feels like to be sick, and what it feels like to just be like, just feel like crap. And I think that if we can recall what that feels like, it will allow us to do what I'm talking about with what Brené Brown talks about with empathy, in terms of perspective taking and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's easy. You will be a better volunteer. You will be a better medical care provider. You will be a better neighbor if you are able to recall what it felt like to be sick, and you're able to empathize with the fact that there are people in the street who are they're just sick. They need the space to get better. And that's where she moves. She also talks, point 2 that she makes is like staying out of judgment and listening. And I think that's the thing, like also like listening to the people that we're serving and listening to their stories and listening to what they're experiencing. I think that's a really important piece of empathizing with people who are dealing with mental and physical illness. She also talks about recognizing emotion in another person that you have maybe felt before. I already talked about that. And then communicating that you can recognize that emotion. And I think that's the other piece of the puzzle for us in terms of as we address this topic, remember that these are people, right? That people are dealing with these, and if you can recall what it felt like to be, just feeling under the weather, you can actually build upon that as you talk to people. So like the expectations you place on them are not unfair or unreasonable. Does that make sense? So the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of as we go into physical, there's a quote in the packet. I put it right on the cover because I think it's that important. And it says, the connection between housing and health is coldly logical. The sick and vulnerable become homeless, and the homeless become sicker and more vulnerable. This is just the reality, right? It's hard to get better when you don't give yourself this space to actually improve. So there's 2 aspects of the health that I want to talk about with regards to homelessness. One is I'm going to start with mental health. Now, here's the thing about mental health. This is more for me, for you, as usual. This is more for me than for you, so you don't even worry about reading it. That's what the packets are for. The reality of mental health is that there is a correlation statistically to people who are experiencing homelessness and mental health struggles. That's just it's kind of like the stigma I talked about with addiction. The same stigma I would say, is regards to mental health. A lot of times we just assume that people are experiencing homelessness because they're crazy. Like that's like that person's crazy, that's why they're homeless. So that person, there's a stereotype, there's a stigma, right? And there's a lot of people who are experiencing mental health struggles who will not share those mental health struggles because of the stigma. And then there are people who will not get the help that they need because they are worried about being stigmatized, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people who, I talked about the 2010 e-housing application in the last workshop. That involves a psychiatric evaluation. It involves what they would call a psychosocial, right? Someone, in order to apply for housing through New York City, has to do a psychosocial. I mentioned this in the last workshop. Well, if you are just dealing with homelessness, you're experiencing homelessness, but you have no record of psychiatric or mental illness, it can feel very judgmental or condescending if you are forced to do a psychiatric evaluation. And it understandably seems completely unfair. Because there's this reality, like, look, I'm just struggling with, I just lost my job, and now I need to go to talk to a psychiatrist about all my alleged mental health issues. And if you feel like you're being stigmatized, and you feel like it's gonna make it harder for you to move forward. And I've even talked to people a lot on the street who will tell me that they are dealing with severe mental illness as a direct result of being homeless. And here's the thing, I talked about this in week 3 with the addiction, when I talked about that, is that there's this cause and consequence, right? Like people will say, I didn't drink until I became homeless. And if you talk to a lot of, there's a great Instagram website, it's also a website called Invisible People. If any of you guys heard of this, I'm just gonna give a little shout out for them. Invisible People is run by a guy named Mark Horvath, who goes around and he shoots. His big thing is helping people humanize folks experiencing homelessness, and he'll shoot videos. He was homeless himself for many years on Skid Row, and now he's an advocate for homeless rights and for And so he'll shoot videos of people experiencing homelessness. And one of the things that he says over and over again is it's hard to do homeless sober. It's hard to do homeless sober. And I think that's probably also true. And again, maybe I'm drawing a bit of a leap here. But I think it's also true that it's hard to probably do homeless completely mentally well. I would imagine that it's hard. Because again, you talk to people, like I know about, this is just a really quick exercise. I want everybody in the room to think something, okay? Are you thinking something? Your brain is activating, you are thinking anything. You are thinking something. Okay, here's my question. Who's talking? And then my next question, who's listening? Right? If you're thinking something, who's talking and who's listening? Somebody, so I have a narrative going in my brain at all times. I'm thinking something. And but there's also a part of me that's listening to the other part of my brain that's thinking. Okay, this may sound like a trivial thing. But imagine if you did not have anybody to talk to for a long period of time. Maybe you are nervous about engaging with strangers. Maybe you are anxious about, you don't feel safe where you're with people around you. And you just don't have anybody in your life who you feel comfortable talking to about what you're thinking. Well, eventually, after a long period of time, those conversations that we all have them. Like I think I just proved the point. If you thought something, you count. If you thought something, and you thought something, and then you thought something, and you heard something, imagine now that you have that experience, but eventually you have to have it out loud. And eventually, because no one's listening to you or you're feeling uncomfortable, like eventually you start having those conversations out loud. Because you want to hear, because human nature is you start talking out loud to yourself. But if no one's responding and no one's engaging, it's very possible, just saying it's very possible, that mental health can be directly impacted by your experience of homelessness. And I'm not saying that again, it's a false stigma to say all homeless people have mental health issues. That's a lie. I'm not saying that's the case. But I'm saying that as a group, we need to acknowledge that there is a certain level of understanding and rationality to mental health issues that people are experiencing when they are in survival mode. So that's another thing just imagine this, all right? So with regards to mental health, I can also tell you that my mental health is significantly deteriorated when I don't sleep very well. I can tell you that. That's a fact. When I don't sleep very well, my mental health goes down. I become impatient. I become grouchy. I sort of scatterbrained. I start thinking, I say things that maybe on a normal day I would probably edit. I don't know if any of you guys have that problem. Maybe it's just me. But my filter comes down, right? And I start talking to people, I start saying the things that maybe I should probably have kept to myself. And on a good day, maybe I would have. Like my daughter is 7 years, almost 7, and she didn't sleep through the night until she was like 5. So I went through like a long stretch of time where I was really not sleeping well. I also have a deviated septum. I don't know if this is maybe oversharing, but my nose goes like this. And so like the only way to fix it is with surgery. And so what that means is, God bless my wife, but I am a snorer. I snore. So as a part of that, again, maybe I'm oversharing, but this is just the way it is. Sorry, guys. But this is the truth. Which I also tend to sleep apnea. I don't know if you're familiar about this. So sleep apnea is this thing where you stop breathing while you're sleeping, and you stop breathing, your body like kicks in. You're like, oh my gosh, gotta wake up. Keep breathing. Your body has. It's a good thing. If you stop breathing, that's a bigger problem. But I mean, like forever. But generally speaking, breathing is good. So I have this sleep app. So I am a terrible sleeper. I don't sleep well. I snore. My wife tells me all the time, like, you really need to go see a doctor. But I don't really want to see a doctor because I'm tired, and it's just exhausting. So I gotta make the appointment. I hate waiting in the waiting room. Do you guys know? So isn't this the worst? And they make you wait in the waiting room, and then they make you wait again. Like, okay, is it just me? But that drives me absolutely bonkers. Because I gotta wait in the waiting room, and then they gotta take me back, and then they gotta wait again in like the little room, right? Sorry, sidebar. So my mental health is significantly deteriorated by my level of sleep. I have read, and now again, I can't source it at the moment, it might be in the packet somewhere, but I will say this. Most people experiencing homelessness do not sleep well. The level of sleep is terrible. Because whether you're sleeping in a shelter with 100 other people in one room, all of whom, like imagine if I was in the shelter bed next to you, like how horrible, how mad would you be, right? Like if I was sleeping in the bunk next to you, you would be ticked. Like I would be the guy that you would like want to punch in the morning, you know, because like I would have been the guy who snored all night and woke up like 38 times and then woke you up and then you didn't sleep. And that's your one bed. Maybe you're limited on, we talked about housing, right, in the shelter, and your ability to get into a bed and actually keep the bed is limited. So the guy next to you is Josiah from New York City Relief, who sleeps terribly, and he's snoring all night. And so your one night of actually being in a bed and not being on a sidewalk, you got placed next to that guy, and, right? And then the next day, you are going in for a job interview. Or, worse, you don't even have the luxury of a job interview, and you don't have any income to go to buy the things you need. And so your mental health, now again, that's one night. 1 night. 2 nights. 3 nights. 4 nights. 5 nights. I've met people who have not had a good night's sleep in several years because of their homelessness. Several years. And we expect and then we will think that they're crazy? You dang straight, you know, like I'd be, like this is the reality. They may have started out completely like again, did you know that the Geneva Convention lists sleep deprivation as torture? Like it's torture. It's sleep, you cannot deprive prisoners of war. You can, like your enemy, you can bomb them, but you cannot capture them and make them like take away their sleep. Like without breaking some ethical rules about war or something, I don't know. But the point is that sleep deprivation affects your mental health. And so experiencing homelessness and experiencing that sleep deprivation is brutal. It's brutal to your ability to cognitively think and process and deal. And so then that person who hasn't slept well is coming into our shelters, coming into our churches. We're passing them on the street. And we're trying, and then that's where I go back to the empathy. We can't judge, right? Like we can't, like, remember that time when you snapped at your spouse or your kids or because you just had a bad night? Like multiply that out and then think about what you're judging of that person, right? So that's just one factor is sleep in terms of how it affects your mental health. The other thing is like if you're gonna get treatment for mental health, like a lot of us would just go see a counselor. Again, I'm gonna completely overshare for as long, so you guys make you as uncomfortable as possible. But like, I saw a therapist for a long time, like once a couple, I'm pro-therapy. Therapy is a good thing. If you haven't gone to therapy, you should. Therapy's good, pro-therapy. Saw a therapist for a while, but I had insurance to actually pay for said therapy. So I was able to see someone who actually had like a kind of a nice, it was like we had the couch thing, like the stereotypical. You had like art on the walls, like little noise machine, like little water rain wall, like I was like in like swanky, like suburban New Jersey, like tell me, yeah, I just don't know. My mother, it was all my mother. Just kidding, Mom. So, but if you're in the street, who in the street is going to prioritize going to see a therapist? If you're surviving, right? Like I've talked to so many people, and the option, I think at one point at one of these sessions I talked about, I advocated for like a mobile therapy option, because it's true, there's so many people who are dealing with like anger issues, sleep deprivation, loneliness, PTSD, oh my goodness, guys, trauma. Like if there's one thing that unifies every single person who experiences homelessness, like a lot of times people are like looking for that like cause, like, people ask me that a lot. Hey, what causes what's the most common cause of homelessness? And I laugh, and that question reveals that you don't understand the complexity of the issue. Because the answer is there isn't really one. But if I had to, if someone's like, okay, put a gun to my head, pick one thing that everybody who experiences homelessness has in common, I would say it's trauma. I would say that if I had to pick one, it would be trauma. Because whether you were traumatized as a child, whether you were traumatized as a teenager. I've met a lot of people who have experienced just there's one guy who comes to our Harlem location, our outreach, and he worked for a magazine for a number of years.